My mom tried to burn my credit card, but she made a shocking mistake, which will cost her. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. My mom tried to burn my credit card, but she had no idea her little stunt would end up costing her everything. This isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, family, and a revenge she never saw coming. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Rachel, I'm 24, and I've been carrying more responsibility on my shoulders than most people my age. After my father passed away a few years ago, life changed overnight. My mom, Linda, became the only parent in the house, and while many would imagine that would bring us closer, it did the opposite. She tightened her grip on me in ways I never expected. I'm a graduate student, balancing classes, assignments, and 2 part-time jobs just to make sure I stay afloat. I work mornings at a small cafe and evenings tutoring high school kids. It's exhausting, but it gives me a sense of pride, at least when I can manage to keep my head above water. Every cent I earn matters. But the problem is, none of that feels like it belongs to me, because my mom insists on controlling every dollar. Linda has a way of twisting everything into a guilt trip. Whenever I try to talk about wanting independence or making my own choices, she cuts me down with sharp words. You'd have nothing without me, she says. After all the sacrifices I've made, this is how you repay me? By acting like you're grown when you're still living under my roof. Those words stick. They make me doubt myself. But deep down, I know I'm not lazy or ungrateful. I know I've been fighting tooth and nail to create something of my own. The hardest part is the constant emotional manipulation. If I buy myself a new shirt, she calls me selfish. If I skip a family errand because I'm studying for an exam, she says I'm inconsiderate. She loves reminding me that she kept this family together after Dad's death, even though I was working quietly in the background to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. What hurts most is the way she talks down to me as if I'm still a child who doesn't understand the real world. In her mind, I'll always be dependent on her, no matter how hard I work or how many responsibilities I take on. And honestly, there are days when I almost start believing her. But the truth is, I've been holding it together on my own for a long time. I've been studying late into the night, rushing between jobs, and pushing myself because I want a future. I want to honor my dad's memory by building something he would have been proud of. What I didn't know then was that my mother's need for control was about to cross a line I could never forgive. The tension between us was already heavy, but soon, she was going to take it to a level that would change everything. And that's where my story really begins. I had been waiting for that moment for months. When the envelope came with my very first credit card, I felt like I finally had a piece of independence in my... It wasn't just plastic to me. It was proof that I could start building a future on my own. I wanted to be able to pay for my school books without begging anyone, to cover emergencies, and to take control of the life I was working so hard to build. It gave me a sense of hope. When my mom found out, she didn't share my excitement. Instead, she looked at me with that sharp glare I'd learned to dread. She asked why I thought I needed something like that. I explained calmly that it was to help me build credit, that I was trying to prepare for when I could live on my own. The more I talked, the more her face tightened. To her, it wasn't about me being responsible. It was about me slipping out of her grip. The argument started small but grew louder by the second. She accused me of hiding things from her, of being sneaky, of pretending I was more grown than I really was. I tried to explain that it was normal for someone my age to take this step, but she refused to hear it. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and full of anger, telling me that I would never survive without her. Before I could react, she snatched the card straight out of my hand. For a second I froze, not believing she'd actually take it. Then she walked to the living room fireplace, and with a bitter smile, she tossed it straight into the flame. I watched in shock as the small piece of plastic curled and melted, the fire eating away at the thing I had been so proud of. She looked back at me and said, "That's how much your independence means here." The words stung more than I can describe. She didn't just burn a card. She burned my trust, my effort, and the one little step forward I had worked for. I rushed toward the fire, pulling out what was left. The bottom half had already melted, but part of it was still intact. My hands shook as I held the ruined piece. It felt like a cruel reminder of how far she was willing to go just to prove she had the final say in my life. That night, I sat alone in my room, holding the damaged card and trying to make sense of everything. My chest felt heavy, like I couldn't breathe. I kept thinking of how my dad would have been proud of me for taking this step. He would never have mocked me for trying to do better. What my mom didn't know, though, was that she had made a mistake. The house still had a working security system, one my dad installed before he passed. Every room, including the living room with the fireplace, had a small camera. And that camera had caught everything she did. She thought she had destroyed my chance at independence, but what she didn't realize was that she had also left behind proof. Proof I would soon need. When I went to the bank to request a replacement card, I thought it would be a simple process. I sat down with the clerk, explained what had happened, and handed over the damaged card. She looked at it, typed a few things into her computer, then paused. Her face changed in a way that made my stomach twist. She asked me to wait for a moment, then stepped away to get a manager. The manager, a calm older man, sat across from me and asked me to confirm some details about my account. I gave him the answers, though I was confused why all of this was necessary for a simple replacement. He then asked a question that froze me in place. Did you recently authorize someone else to access this account on your behalf? I shook my head immediately. I told him no one else had permission, that this account was mine alone. He gave me a careful look, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. On it was my name, except it wasn't my handwriting. It was my mother's. My chest went cold. She had tried to sign for me. The manager explained that someone had come in a few days earlier attempting to access the account. They claimed they were acting for me and insisted they had the right to use the fund. The request was denied because the signature didn't fully match, but the attempt was still on record. That's when it hit me. The card she burned wasn't just a regular credit card. It was connected to a savings account tied to my inheritance. The money my dad had set aside for me, the money he wanted me to use for school, a future home, or whatever I needed to build a life, was in that account. And my mom had tried to get her hands on it. I sat there in silence, trying to take it all in. The anger, the shock, the betrayal, it all came at once. She hadn't just burned my independence in the fireplace. She had been trying to take away everything my father had left for me, the last piece of security he had given me before he passed. That realization cut deeper than anything else she'd done. The manager reassured me that the account was still safe and that stronger protections could be added. I agreed to every security measure available. I set up new passwords, added extra identification requirements, and made sure that nothing could be touched without me present. As I signed the papers, my hands trembled. It felt like I was not just protecting money. I was protecting my future, the one thing my mother had been determined to steal. Walking out of the bank, I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't about strict parenting or even controlling behavior anymore. This was about greed. My mom hadn't only wanted control over me. She wanted control over everything I had, even if it meant betraying the trust of her own daughter. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't just trying to keep me close. She was trying to take my future away completely. I went home from the bank with a storm inside me. My chest felt heavy, and my mind kept repeating the same thought over and over. This was my own mother. The woman who had carried me, raised me, and should have been my protector, had chosen instead to betray me in the worst way possible. I had seen parents fight with their children before, but this felt different. This wasn't just an argument. This was a deliberate act to take away the one thing I had left from my dad. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, and memories of my father came flooding back. I could still hear his voice, steady and reassuring. When I was a teenager and doubted myself, he once said, "One day, you'll need to stand strong, Rachel. Don't let anyone, family or not, decide your worth." At the time, I hadn't understood why he said those words so firmly, almost as if he knew I'd need them later. Now I understood. He must have seen the controlling side of my mother and worried about what would happen when he wasn't there to shield me. The thought that he had prepared me for this gave me both comfort and sadness. Comfort, because it meant he believed I could handle it. Sadness, because I wished more than anything that he were still here to protect me from the woman who should have loved me unconditionally. When I faced my mother the next morning, I forced a calm smile. I acted as though the fight about the card hadn't broken me, as though I had accepted her authority. She looked at me carefully, maybe trying to see if I was angry, but I gave her nothing. On the outside, I was quiet and agreeable. On the inside, I was burning. Pretending wasn't easy. Every time she made a comment about how I'd never make it without her, I wanted to scream. Every time she reminded me of her sacrifices, I wanted to tell her the truth I now knew. But I didn't. I kept my mouth shut and nodded, letting her believe she still had control. Because I realized something important. I couldn't win this battle with anger alone. If I wanted to protect what was mine, I had to be smarter than her. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt close to breaking many times, and there were nights I cried until I couldn't anymore. But somewhere in the middle of all that pain, something shifted. The betrayal had hurt me deeply, but it also woke me up. I couldn't keep living under her control, waiting for the next time she would try to take something. Instead of letting the weight crush me, I decided to turn it into strength. I promised myself I would not only protect what my dad left me, but also make sure my mother never had the chance to do something like this again. For the first time, I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as someone who could fight back. And that decision was the beginning of everything that came next. I knew I couldn't face this alone anymore. Keeping quiet and pretending in front of my mother was one thing, but I needed someone on my side who actually understood the law. My dad had once told me about a lawyer he trusted, a man named Mr. Carter. I remembered his name clearly because my father had said, "If anything ever happens to me, Rachel, you can count on him." At the time, I never thought I'd need to. But now, I realized this was exactly what Dad meant. I called Mr. Carter's office and explained that I was the daughter of one of his old clients. When I met him in person, he was kind, calm, and surprisingly familiar, as if he still carried the memory of my father with him. I told him everything, how my mother had burned my card, how she tried to access my savings account, and how I had discovered her betrayal at the bank. He listened carefully, nodding slowly, and asked me if I had any proof. That's when I mentioned the security system. I showed him the footage of my mother pulling the card from my hand and throwing it into the fire. He leaned back in his chair, let out a breath, and said, "Rachel, this isn't just destructive behavior. This is evidence of her trying to sabotage your finance. Combined with the attempted access to your account, this could be taken very seriously." Hearing those words made me feel stronger. For the first time, I wasn't just a daughter caught in a toxic relationship. I was someone with proof and someone who could finally stand up against the control that had crushed me for so long. Mr. Carter began asking about my father's estate. I told him everything I knew, that Dad had left money for me, that the account was tied to my inheritance, and that Mom always acted like it was hers to oversee. Mr. Carter gave me a look I'll never forget. He told me that he had actually helped draft my father's will years ago, and there were conditions in it that I might not know about. My father had left specific protections to make sure my inheritance could never be touched by anyone else, not even my mother. The shock hit me hard. My father had thought ahead, almost as if he predicted this exact situation. Mr. Carter explained that certain documents were supposed to be shared with me when I turned 21, but it looked like my mother had hidden them. She had been keeping me in the dark, hoping I'd never realize I had rights and protections of my own. That night, I sat with all the new information spread out in front of me. For so long, I felt powerless, but now I had more than anger. I had evidence, I had the law on my side, and I had my father's careful planning working in my favor. Slowly, the picture became clear. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about turning the tables and finally showing my mother that the control she thought she had over me was gone forever. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Every morning I woke up and acted like nothing had changed, like I still believed her words and her rules. My mom seemed more confident than ever, walking around the house as though she had complete control. She would throw little comments my way, reminders that I was lucky to have her, that I would never survive out there without her guidance. Each remark cut into me, but I held my expression steady and stayed quiet. I knew I had to wait for the right moment. That moment finally came during dinner one evening. We were sitting at the table, eating in silence, when I asked her a simple question. I kept my tone calm, almost casual. "Mom, do you think I'm responsible enough to manage my own money?" She looked up from her plate with that same smug smile. "Of course not," she said. "That's why I have to step in. You'd make a mess of everything if it weren't for me. Someone has to keep you in line." She leaned back, her voice rising as if she wanted me to feel small. "You don't realize how much you need me, Rachel. Without me, you wouldn't last a day." I let her continue, nodding slightly, waiting until she was finished. My hands stayed steady on my fork, even though my heart was pounding. When she finally stopped, I put my fork down and looked her straight in the eye. My voice was flat, without anger, just firm. "That's interesting, Mom, because I actually have proof that you've been doing more than just keeping me in line." Her smile faltered. She tilted her head, trying to read me, but I didn't look away. I continued, my tone as even as before. "I have the footage from Dad's security cameras, the ones you didn't know were still running. They recorded you burning my card. I also have the bank statements showing you tried to access my account, and the forged signature with your handwriting on it. All of it." For the first time, I saw her confidence slip. Her face drained of color, and she blinked like she wasn't sure what to say. Her hands, usually so quick to point and accuse, stayed frozen on the table. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't have to. I simply added, "The lawyer Dad trusted has everything. He knows about the will you tried to hide. So tell me again how you think you're the one keeping me in line." The silence that followed was heavy. My mom's mouth opened, then closed, but no words came out. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of the authority she had worn like armor for years. At that table, in that moment, the power she had clung to so tightly crumbled right in front of her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The very next morning, I met with Mr. Carter and handed over everything. The footage, the bank records, and the documents from my father's will, All of it went into a neat folder that he carried with him like a weapon. He assured me that this was more than enough to take action. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't standing alone. Within days, legal steps were put into motion. My mother was formally warned and then barred from having any access to my accounts. Every attempt she had made to take control was now documented under her name. The inheritance my father had left me, the savings I worked so hard to protect, was finally secure. But that was only the beginning. The lawyer explained that her actions weren't just wrong morally, they carried real consequences. Destruction of property, attempted fraud, forgery. All of it counted and all of it mattered. When the news began to spread through the family, the reaction was immediate. My mother had always presented herself as the strong, selfless parent who carried the weight of the world after my father's death. She loved to remind relatives of her sacrifices, always painting herself as the victim who gave everything for her daughter. But now the image she built so carefully shattered. My cousins, uncles, and even my grandparents saw the truth laid bare. They saw the proof, and they couldn't believe what she had done. Phone calls started coming my way, some with sympathy, some with shock, and some with anger directed at her. The woman who always demanded respect was now whispered about as selfish and manipulative. The betrayal wasn't mine anymore, it was hers. At home, the atmosphere grew unbearable. My mother's anger turned into silence. She no longer shouted, no longer gloated. She just looked at me with a bitterness that seemed to eat her alive. But by then I was past caring. The walls that once made me feel trapped now felt like a prison I refused to stay in. I packed my things slowly, piece by piece, until I was ready to leave. I had reached out to an old friend of my father's, a man named Mr. Daniels, who had always been kind to me growing up. When he heard what happened, he told me I could stay in his guest room for as long as I needed. Moving into his home felt like stepping into a safe space for the first time in years. It wasn't about comfort or luxury, it was about peace. As I set my bags down in that small, quiet room, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The fight wasn't over, but I was no longer under her roof, no longer at the mercy of her control. My mother was facing the weight of her own choices, and I was finally free enough to start living without fear. The fallout had broken her image, but for me, it marked the first step toward reclaiming my life. Living under Mr. Daniels' roof gave me something I hadn't felt in years: quiet. The kind of quiet where I didn't have to second-guess every word I said or brace myself for sudden outbursts. For the first time, I could close my eyes at night without fear of what the next morning would bring. That freedom became the foundation for what I did next. With my mother no longer holding the reins, I began focusing fully on school. I put my energy into my classes, showing up prepared and determined. Instead of walking into lectures with a head full of stress, I could finally think clearly. My grades started improving, and professors noticed the change. I wasn't distracted anymore. I was building something. Work also became easier to manage. The cafe shifts were still tiring, and tutoring still took patience, but I carried myself differently now. I wasn't working just to survive under someone else's control. I was working for myself. Each paycheck went directly into accounts that only I could touch. For once, my effort truly belonged to me. The inheritance that had been at risk now became a tool I treated with care. I sat with Mr. Carter and a financial advisor he recommended. Together, we set up a plan that allowed me to pay my tuition without worrying about debt piling up. I also started setting aside money for a future apartment. Knowing that every dollar was safe from my mother gave me a sense of control I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about money, though. It was about the peace of choosing for myself. If I wanted to buy a coffee after class, I did it without hearing someone call me selfish. If I wanted to spend an afternoon studying instead of running errands, I didn't have to explain myself. The small freedoms built into something bigger, a life that finally felt like mine. Meanwhile, my mother's world was crumbling. Word of her actions continued to spread through family and into the community. Neighbors who once praised her for being strong after my father's death now looked at her with suspicion. Friends she bragged to slowly stopped inviting her out. The same woman who thrived on appearances now found herself alone. I didn't take joy in her downfall, but I couldn't ignore the truth. She had built her reputation on lies, and lies never last forever. People began to see her as she really was, someone who put control and greed above love and honesty. One evening, as I walked home from a late tutoring session, I realized how much lighter I felt. My life was still busy, and I still carried responsibilities, but the weight of constant fear was gone. I was no longer living under someone else's rules. I was living by my own choices, and that peace, however simple, felt like the greatest victory I had ever earned. Months passed, and my life began to feel steady. I was focused on my studies, saving money, and planning the next chapter for myself. Then one afternoon, when I least expected it, my past came knocking. I opened the door to find my mother standing there. She looked nothing like the woman who used to tower over me with pride and sharp words. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face was pale, and her eyes were full of desperation. "Rachel," she said, her voice shaky, "I need your help." I stood in the doorway, gripping the handle tightly, unsure whether to let her in. She went on quickly, explaining how bills had piled up, how debts were crushing her, and how no one in the family was willing to listen anymore. The same relatives who once praised her now avoided her calls. She was alone, and for the first time, she admitted it out loud. She begged me to forgive her. She said things could go back to how they were, that we could start over. Her words spilled out in a rush, but all I could hear underneath them was the same manipulation I had grown up with. She wasn't apologizing because she truly cared about me. She was asking because she needed something. I let her finish, keeping my face calm. When her voice broke into a whisper, she reached out to grab my hand. I gently pulled it away and finally spoke. "You tried to burn my future, Mom, but all you did was burn your bridge to me." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked like she didn't understand. I held her gaze without flinching. "I built this life without you. I made it through everything you tried to take from me. I won't go back, and I won't let you drag me down again." She opened her mouth to protest, but I stepped back and closed the door. My heart was racing, but my hands didn't shake this time. I stood there in the quiet, knowing that I had finally done what needed to be done. I had ended the cycle of control, guilt, and manipulation that had defined so much of my life. Walking away from her wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about getting even. The real revenge was in reclaiming the power she had stolen from me for so long. By saying no, by refusing to let her back into my world, I had shown her that she no longer had control over me. As I sat down in my small apartment later that evening, I felt a calm I couldn't put into words. The pain of her betrayal was still there, but it no longer controlled me. She was the one left empty-handed, while I finally held my freedom. And that, more than anything else, was the victory I had been waiting for. The sun was setting when I stepped out onto the small porch of my apartment. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of colors that made everything feel softer. I sat down with a cup of tea in my hands and let the cool evening air wash over me. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally breathe without fear, without someone waiting to take that breath away. I thought about the road that brought me here. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when I felt broken, days when I questioned if I had the strength to keep moving forward. But sitting there in that quiet moment, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the girl living in a house where every choice was questioned, where every effort was torn down. I had become someone who stood up for herself, someone who found strength in the very place where pain tried to destroy me. The memories still hurt. I couldn't erase the image of my mother throwing my card into the fire, or the sting of finding out she had tried to steal what my father left for me. Those scars would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they reminded me of what I had survived. I leaned back in the chair, hearing my father's voice in my mind, the words he had once told me. "One day, you'll need to stand strong, Rachel. Don't let anyone, family or not, decide your worth." At the time, I hadn't known how much those words would mean. Now I carried them with me every day. He had been right. Standing strong was the only way I had made it through. I thought about my mother and how different things could have been if she had chosen love instead of control. She had lost so much, not because I wanted to punish her, but because she refused to change. In the end, her need for power left her alone, while I finally found freedom. It was bittersweet, knowing she was still my mother yet realizing I had to let her go. I took a sip of tea and let the silence surround me. The world felt different now, not perfect, but mine. My life was in my hands, and I no longer had to ask permission to live it. That realization brought a small smile to my face. As the sky darkened, I whispered to myself the truth I had learned through all of it. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it's from the people we trust most. But betrayal doesn't end you, it reveals you. And in the end, my mom lost control of me, but I gained the strength to control my own life. It was a hard road full of pain and loss, but sitting there on that porch, I knew I had come out stronger. And that strength was mine to keep forever.